The following program is a UWTV classic.
From the University of Washington in Seattle, Upon Reflection.
Hello and welcome to Upon Reflection. I'm Marcia Alvar. In March of 1985, Terry Anderson was living in Beirut, working as chief Middle East correspondent for the Associated Press, engaged to be married, a baby on the way. A comfortable life despite the danger around him. But one morning, in a few violent minutes, his life changed forever when he was forced from his car at gunpoint and taken hostage by Shiite radicals. Almost 7 years passed before Anderson was again a free man. Years he describes in his new book, Den of Lions. It's a memoir of faith and survival and a testament to the tenacity of the human spirit. It's a great pleasure for any number of reasons to welcome Terry Anderson to Upon Reflection, as well as Madeleine Bassil, now Mrs. Terry Anderson. You both, in the parts that you both write in your book, talk about how extraordinary it is that you stayed together because you had really not been together all that long when Terry was taken.
About a year.
Yeah.
I don't know how I could ever explain how that feels to spend 6 years and 9 months and some odd days away and then come home and find her still waiting there.
And Madeleine, during Terry's captivity, you had been very silent. I mean, Terry, in the book, you always keep referring to the shadowy group, how groups in the Middle East are referred to as shadowy this and shadowy that. And Madeleine, you had made the decision, while Terry was in captivity, that you would not speak to the media. Why not?
For many different reasons. One of them is I did not want to give them the pleasure of seeing us or seeing me. To them, it's begging. And I've worked with other wives, hostages who were kidnapped, their wives, and I would never wanted to be in their shoes. I'm also Lebanese Christian and not married to the man I'm about to have a baby from. So for many different reasons. Mainly, I did not want them to have the pleasure of hearing me suffer.
And you didn't give them that pleasure, but it also meant that you didn't hear a whole lot about Madeleine during your captivity.
Oh, but that's not so. She made at least twice a year videotapes of my daughter with her voice and talking about us, and gave them to the Lebanese media. And amazingly, quite graciously, the Lebanese television and radio stations played them. Yeah. And I heard several of them. I heard a number of them.
But you were still very concerned, though. You were still very
worried. Course. Well, I'm not very concerned because, I had and have the utmost trust in Madeleine's judgment. Whatever it was she was going to do was going to be right for her and for her child. You have to wonder. She's a beautiful woman. She's a young woman.
It's a long
years
time
go
to
by.
be alone.
It's a long time. She could well have decided that she had to go on with her life, but she didn't.
Let's talk about why you were in the Middle East. As a correspondent with the Associated Press, you probably could have been any number of places around the world, but why the Middle East?
Well, I was originally sent there from South Africa. I volunteered to go in 1982 when the Israelis invaded South Lebanon, temporarily, just to help out for the war. I stayed then a couple of months through the siege of West Beirut. I fell in love with the place. It's fascinating. It is, even in the war, it was beautiful. The people are amazing, tremendously courageous, tremendously energetic. You watch them, there'd be a 2-day lull in the war and they'd start rebuilding. They'd start putting glass back in and working on buildings. And I wanted to stay. I finally decided to, the Middle East caught hold of me. And it's endlessly complex, it's different, It's fascinating.
You referred to the politics of that region as a pavan of some sort.
Yes, it is ritualistic, it is complicated, it is not hard to understand if you isolate each strand and each piece. But it's when all the pieces come together and start influencing each other, so that you have, in Lebanon, for instance, you have a conflict between the Druze and the Christians. You have a conflict between the Christians and the Muslims, or the Palestinians, which affects the relationship between the Palestinians and the Druze and the Shia. You have a conflict between the Shia and the Sunni. It all, makes it very complicated. Each piece is not so hard to understand.
No.
But the whole thing is sometimes mind-boggling.
So who were these men who took you?
Well, it's not difficult to say. They're Shiite fundamentalist radicals, and I stress the radical because I think it's important to remember that they are extremists. They do not represent the main line of Shia or Islam or Lebanon or Arabs. They're radicals. They're few people, and we shouldn't stigmatize everyone else. They were members of a party called Hezbollah, Party of God, in Lebanon. We have some of their names. I can name some of them. The leader, the man who ordered my kidnapping and held me, was Imad Mughniya, whose brother-in-law was in Kuwait, in jail for terrorist acts, professional terrorist, and whose wife told Mr. Mughniya, get my brother out.
You mentioned the differentiation, these individual men who took you, and the Shia, this majority in Lebanon. And Madeleine, when you wrote about them, you wrote about these people with some sympathy. They are not necessarily the individuals who took Terry, but that they are the majority in the country, and yet they are persecuted and oppressed by almost all of the other parties.
Everybody that went their way pushed them down, and everybody who passed the south of Lebanon stepped on their heads, and they suffered a lot. They've been suffering from Lebanese, from Palestinians, from Israelis, from everybody who passed their way. And it's no wonder that after a while you create a monster from suffering. And there again, you can't control that monster anymore. That's, I think, what happened to us.
What are your impressions, having done a lot of interviews about this book, of what we know about your country?
Well, a book or two will not give you the whole picture. I don't think the Americans know a lot about my country or about the area altogether. There are some, how do we say, knowledgeable people who study very well, who live there for years. I think a couple of the ex-hostages knew Lebanon very well. So you have to go there, live with the people to understand them, really.
Terry, can you talk about the phases of your captivity? When you look back at those years and months that you spent, do they fall into phases?
I guess you could say that. You could look at it that way. I mean, the first few months of shock and frustration and anger and bitterness and just trying to grapple with what had happened and trying to devise ways to handle it, to get your mind around it and to deal with it. And then there was a long period of being with other hostages in which we used each other, we leaned on each other and used each other's minds and began to, Madeleine says we became professional hostages, that is, began to learn the techniques and the attitudes that were necessary to survive.
Oh, survival.
That just kind of went on and on and on, and in the last couple of years when there was at least some real expectation that a solution was being developed, was coming, even leading up to the beginning of the Gulf War. What was that, February of '90? There was a long period there when everybody seemed to think that there were negotiations and it was being worked out. The Gulf War interrupted it, delayed everything because everybody was too busy with a real war. And they got other things to worry about, and then that picked up again afterward. That you could call the kind of the ending phase.
In some ways, wasn't that almost harder? I mean, the expectation, and there were many times when you were dressed and ready to go, and it would all fall apart again.
Yeah. Sometimes that was just a cruel hoax. Sometimes they really did believe we were going to go free.
Yeah.
Yeah, those were very difficult times.
How did you survive it?
The main thing about, well, you just do it. You don't have choices. It's not as if we had decided that we're going to do this and we just kind of buckle down and do it. There isn't anything else to do.
But everybody, all the hostages reacted very differently and coped with their captivity
Everybody
differently.
coped with it differently. Everybody reacted differently. We've decided, we were talking about this. Brian Keenan's visiting me now. And
From Ireland.
Yeah, and his wife. We were talking about this the other night. And after a long rambling discussion of the kind that we often have, we decided, you know, it is all very much about the people, not about the events. In other words, all facing the same events, the same tests, the same strains. We all had to reach inside ourselves to find something that would get us through, some way to deal with it. And therefore, the way we handled it is not a reflection of the events, it's a reflection of ourselves, our attitudes, our personalities.
You write about searching for a place in yourself that wasn't angry, that wasn't frustrated, that a place in yourself that would give you a kind of peace, that would let you be at least for a little while.
That's always what you do. That's always what you try to do. For me, it was in my faith. It was in the Bible. It was in prayer. Other people found it elsewhere.
And oddly enough, you had only had a feeling of the rekindling of your faith shortly before, within months.
Just about 6 months beforehand. I had been groping around for some time, trying to make sense out of my life and what had happened to me, and the things that I had seen as a correspondent, and I ended up going back to the church. I mean, that just seemed to be a recognition of that's what I am. I'm a Catholic. I'm a Christian. I may not have handled it very well, and I'm not quite sure what to do with it, but that's what I am. Then I got given a great hunk of time to decide what to do with it.
How does that, I was reading a review just the other day of a book by Primo Levi, and somebody referred to this book of his as it was a book about surviving the survival. What happens after you survive a terrible time, as both of you went through, and then how you survive the return and the reconciliation.
You do it with a lot of help, and we had a lot of help.
Yeah, we had good help.
Who helped you?
Well, we started with the two psychiatrists that traveled with us to the Caribbean, where we went and stayed for 3 months. They stayed with us for about 2-3 weeks.
They're Royal Air Force psychiatrists, specialists in hostage decompression, they call it, prisoners of war, that the AP borrowed from the Royal Air Force at her instigation because she went and talked to John McCarthy.
In fact, you mentioned John McCarthy, a British hostage who was with Brian Keenan much of the time. It's a wonderful part of the book, which I won't spoil for readers. But you mentioned that before Terry was released, you had gotten in touch with these psychiatrists, and that a number of things that you would naturally have wanted to do, they cautioned you against doing. Can you talk about the advice they gave you?
Well, I can mention a couple. First of all, my feeling was I didn't want to go to Damascus. I wasn't going to go through that path that everybody did, and you know, I just wasn't comfortable.
Grinder that everybody
I wasn't
went
comfortable with it. And the first thing he said, "Oh no, be there. This man wants to see you there." You know, and he was right.
I'd have been grievously disappointed.
It would have been a different start, completely different start. There were other things. I mean, all the things that I thought came first to him, you know, did not actually, it would not have been first thing that he would have wanted, rather than the things that they advised me to do. So I had pretty much to be directed from them, which did very, very well. Yeah, we were very lucky with that.
First thing they said was to get away. Get
Oh, I
away
was
from
going to
everybody.
go away anyway. I wasn't going to try to go through what we're doing
Live your life
today
in the public
immediately.
eye.
No, no. I knew it was never going to work. And I've seen other women go through that and the problems they did have, you know, afterwards.
Does your experience put a kind of a peculiar kind of pressure on a relationship? I mean, sort of the banality of everyday life. You get annoyed, he leaves his socks around the house, you know, she doesn't squeeze the toothpaste tube right.
But it's
I
not.
don't
feel I
close the
can't
lid.
yell at this
I don't
person.
put the lid on the toothpaste, did you
It's
say?
not. First of all, it's not banal. Everyday life is very pleasurable most of the time, and we enjoy ourselves every day doing ordinary things. And sure, we argue. We have fights.
That would be very
About what's-
boring.
Yeah. about once every 10 days or so, she gets madder than the devil at me, and we have a good knockdown drag out, and then we go on. I mean, the banal things, as you call them, the everyday things, I think those are pleasures. We don't have enough time to do that.
Now, your personal stories are part of this book, but there's also a third voice, which is more Terry Anderson, the journalist, writing about the context, what's going on in the world, the activities of the government. And there's a story that you tell about coming to the United States to have your baby, meeting for the first time with people from the State Department, and I think the exact words you used were, they didn't have a clue about the Middle East.
No, they didn't. At least the people I sat with at the State Department didn't know anything about us. They didn't know who they're dealing with. I was shocked. You know, as I said, you know, like every Lebanese, I thought they knew everything. They're on the top of their, you know, they're very intelligent. They didn't know anything. I think they thought about Lebanon and the Shiites and all this like Palestine 1940. And it is not. These are not the same people the world dealt with then, and they're completely different. And I was, it's a shame to know that the people who are working on such a circumstance, you know, bad, how do you say?
Crisis?
A crisis, didn't know anything about it and how to handle it, what to do with it.
And in the research that you did, Terry, what did you find out about what the government was or wasn't doing?
Well, as you know, the whole world knows about the arms for hostages in Iran-Contra now. And part of what I was doing was just kind of trying to probe that a little bit and develop it a little bit more. And I think I did that. I did manage to do it.
Not easily, though.
No, it wasn't easy. But there isn't any doubt in my mind, as there shouldn't be in anyone's mind, that President Reagan and Vice President Bush knew everything that was going on and approved of it. And in fact, encouraged it. And that is an observation, not an accusation. And I was just trying to get a sense for why. How did this happen? Everybody went into this saying, this is something we can't do. We can't trade arms for hostages.
And
we
we
know
won't do
that,
it.
and we're not going to do it. And they did it. And
And they lied about
they
it.
kind of backed into it. And, you know, how does that happen? How do ordinarily intelligent people manage to get themselves in such a mess? And I think I did learn enough from the people involved to explain that. Also learned some things about what was happening in Lebanon and things about Hezbollah, Islamic Jihad, how it started and what they were doing that I didn't know at the time before I was kidnapped as a journalist there. I find now that I knew a lot less than I should have known about what was going on in Lebanon.
You wrote a piece in the New York Times while you were doing your research where you talked about how difficult it was for you to get the information you were looking for this book. And You describe the government as kind of a culture of non-cooperation.
Not the government as a whole, the people who administer the Freedom of Information Act. There is an entire bureaucracy that handles Freedom of Information requests. This is, as you know, a federal law that is supposed to require them to review secret files and release whatever is no longer necessary to be held secret. It has, under the Reagan and Bush administrations, the culture, the bureaucrats were encouraged to make it difficult, to pervert the spirit of the law. And it has become a very complex game.
It's a wonderful piece that was in the Times. It's really too bad you couldn't print it as an
Yeah.
addendum to the book, because there are a lot of great stories about that. I wanted to ask you both as well about the media. And Madeleine, you worked with two networks in Lebanon. You, of course, have been a reporter for many years. Did the media help or hurt?
They couldn't have hurt, frankly. I mean, at times I thought that they sometimes they can do harm if they don't say the right thing at the right time, you know, and if they don't know when to keep things, you know,
The
to themselves.
speculation, the hypothesis that you see in the press sometimes.
I
They
think
got us in
when-
trouble a couple of times, at least
Yeah.
once, seriously. On the whole, though, I think they did a pretty good job.
Yeah,
They were sensitive. They
very sensitive.
were respectful. They treated the story straightforwardly most of the
Yes.
time. And I knew that they were all my colleagues, and they really did. They really were concerned about us, personally concerned as well as professionally.
Yeah, many were, yes.
One of for those of us who watched all of this from a distance and watched your sister, Peggy Say, a good deal of the time, there was such a contrast between Peggy and her visibility, her criticism of the government, which at one point in the book, Madeleine, you refer to as kind of who needs a PR agency for the terrorists when people are running around criticizing the government. You disagreed strongly with that. And there were bitter feelings between the two of you. Was it about the visibility versus keeping yourself out of the public eye?
Well, I said what I said in the book. I really don't want to go through this like that. We are two different people. We come from completely two different cultures, and we're going through two different aspects of pain. She's his sister, and I'm his fiancée. We saw things differently, but I respect what she did. She did what she thought she was doing right, and I wasn't going to keep it. You know, we wrote this book to be truthful, and if I had kept that part, then I wasn't truthful in my part.
To be honest, it's sort of
To
a
be
warts and
honest.
all, very human.
To be honest, but I hope, and I hope it won't go beyond that. You know, the whole issue of Peggy and myself. That's
Now, your life now, you live in Yonkers, New York, and you're very involved in you've gone from international to very local grassroots, something you called jokingly Jihad Americana.
Yeah, the formal name of an organization that I've helped to found is Alliance for a New York Renaissance. It's a grassroots civic reform effort aimed at state government. One of many these days. I'm sure you've seen others, and there are a number of them in New York with different focuses. We are trying to open up our state government again to make it responsive and to make it address issues that it is not, in our view, addressing.
You probably could have had any number of different types of jobs. I know you were offered a position at the United Nations and decided after some thought not to do that. Why local? Why take it so far to the roots?
Well, it's not local, it's state. New York's a big state, you know, and it's got 17 million people. It's important.
It's actually at least two states in one state.
Yeah, well, yeah. There's a compromise involved here. I could work at the national level and try to do something, maybe get a job with the Clinton administration, the UN, something like that. In which case, I would be unlikely to have any great impact on a country as big as ours. Be unlikely to see results of what I wanted to do. I could work very locally In Yonkers, for instance, city politics, and have an immediate impact on people's lives, on day-to-day issues.
Is there a
I found a place.
candidacy?
I found a place in between, you know, where we can deal with important things on a level at which I can hope to have some kind of impact.
I was going to ask you this, but I'll ask you instead. Is he going to run for office?
Not yet.
Not quite ready for that kind of public.
No, not yet.
Was it therapeutic writing this book together?
Very.
I was struck, you know, I know you've recorded an audio version of it as well, and wondered if that wasn't even more emotional, for some reason having the words spoken aloud instead of writing them.
No, it wasn't easy.
We
Just
both
like
cried.
writing the book.
Does it put a kind of closure? Is this a period or maybe even just a semicolon in this part of your life?
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, it is, we have gone, you know, over these years again, carefully, put ourselves back there, felt again what we felt, thought about it, put our thoughts down in a book, which has both helped us in our growing closer and helped us deal with it. We can talk about it easily now. It's not a problem. And when this is all done, perhaps maybe we can go on and concentrate more fully on the rest of our lives. For a long time to come, I'm going to be former hostage.
If you run for
Terry
political
Anderson.
office, you'll definitely be former
That's
hostage.
okay. It's a fact. It's what people will remember. And they did care about us, you know, really deeply. A lot of
You were
people
surprised
cared.
at that, weren't you?
I was shocked. And not shocked, but I was stunned, I should say. That's okay. I'm former hostage. I would like to go on and do something that would, you know, kind of push that down into the second sentence or
add to
something.
it.
Yeah.
We have just a very few seconds left. Are you ever going to go back
Someday, I hope to.
someday?
Yeah.
Not for a while.
Not soon though. I think it's not the right time yet.
I want to thank you both so much for being guests, Terry Anderson
Thank you.
and Madeleine Bassil, and your book, Den of Lions. People should read it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
To see more UWTV classics, visit uwtv.org/classics.